What if the person you love the most begins to disappear, not suddenly, not dramatically, but in slow, deliberate silence? No explanation, no conflict, just a growing distance that stretches between you like a void. At first you search for reasons. You replay conversations, analyze every message, every glance. You ask yourself what you did wrong, but the truth may not lie in your actions at all. Because sometimes, the more we love, the more afraid we become. And when fear speaks louder than love, people vanish. Not out of hatred, but out of unbearable intensity. Carl Jung taught that what we refuse to acknowledge within ourselves doesn't simply disappear. It manifests loudly, painfully in our relationships. And love of all things is where these buried truths come to life. You see, love doesn't just touch the surface. It pierces through it. It drags the unconscious into the light. Every childhood wound, every fear of abandonment, every shadow of rejection, all of it surfaces raw and exposed. Think about it. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that it frightened you? Have you ever felt seen by someone in a way that made you want to run? When you love authentically, you are no longer hidden. You're vulnerable, open. Your defenses fall away, and the person in front of you becomes a mirror. Not a mirror of who you want to be, but of who you really are. They reflect your need, your longing, your fear of loss, your hunger for connection, your self-doubt. This is the paradox of intimacy. It brings us closer to another person, but also closer to the truth about ourselves. And not everyone is ready for that kind of truth. Not everyone can look in the mirror without flinching. So they withdraw. They ignore. They put up a wall, not because they don't care, but because they care too much and it overwhelms them. From the outside it looks like disinterest, but deep inside it's often a storm. Jung would say that what is not made conscious will be lived as fate. And in love, that fate often takes the shape of avoidance, silence, sabotage. Because the unconscious doesn't speak in words, it speaks in patterns. And one of those patterns is disappearing when it hurts too much to stay. When someone starts ignoring you, your first instinct is to panic, to fix it, to pull them back. But what if their silence is not about you? What if it's about them losing the battle with their own inner world? People don't run away from others as much as they run away from themselves, from the possibility of being hurt, from the threat of dependency, from the unbearable pressure of being known. There's a term in psychology, emotional dysregulation. It refers to the inability to manage intense feelings. Now imagine falling in love when you've never felt safe before. Imagine someone touching parts of your soul that you didn't know still hurt. What you feel may not be comfort, but exposure. What you experience may not be joy, but panic. And so the unconscious responds, by pulling away, by freezing, by silencing the bond, not because love has died, but because it has become too real. Ask yourself this. Is it possible that the one who ignores you does so not because they feel nothing, but because they feel too much? Sometimes, ignoring is not the absence of love. It's the fear of what love is awakening. We like to believe that love should feel safe, soft, warm, but Jung would disagree. Real love, he said, is not just about bliss, it's about wholeness. And wholeness demands that we confront the shadow, the parts of ourselves we hide, repress, deny. In the presence of someone who truly sees us, those shadows rise, and we are faced with a choice. Do we face them, or do we run? So many people run, not because they are cruel, but because they are scared of the person they become when they're vulnerable, scared of losing themselves, of becoming too dependent, of needing someone so much they forget who they were before. When someone begins to ignore you without explanation, their silence may be their way of regaining control over an internal world that feels chaotic. It's not calculated, it's instinctive. Like a child hiding under a bed when they're afraid. It's not about logic, it's about survival. And here lies the great misunderstanding. We take it personally. We believe their silence means we're unworthy, unlovable. We try harder. We chase, we beg, but that only makes them retreat further, because now they feel trapped, overwhelmed not only by their own emotions but by yours. And so the dance continues. The more you pull, the more they vanish. The more they vanish, the more you suffer. It's a cruel loop, rooted not in malice but in unconscious fear. True love, if it is to survive, must allow space. Not the space of abandonment, but the space of breathing, of processing, of becoming. Because sometimes stepping back is the only way a person can confront the storm within them. And if we try to stop them, we only intensify the storm. Think of it like this. When someone ignores you, they may be unconsciously asking, will you still be here, even if I can't hold you right now? Will you give me space without punishing me for needing it? Will you let me fall apart and not try to fix me? These are not easy questions, and they are not always spoken aloud, but they are felt deeply beneath the surface. There is a certain cruelty in this kind of love, yes, because it asks for patience without guarantee. It asks for presence in the absence of clarity. It asks for faith where there is no closure. But perhaps that is what makes it real. The space between two people is where the unconscious breathes. And sometimes silence is not the end of love, but its deepest expression. Because only in silence can we hear what the soul is truly saying. Of course, not everyone who disappears will return. Not everyone who pulls away is meant to stay. But here is a painful truth. Even if they never come back, their leaving was still part of your becoming. Their absence still taught you something about your strength, your fear, your longing, your need, about how much you're willing to give and how much you must learn to give to yourself. Love, as Jung saw it, is not about finding completeness in another. It's about uncovering the completeness already within. And the people we love, especially the ones who hurt us, are often the catalysts for that discovery. They come into our lives not to fulfill us, but to reveal what within us still aches to be healed. So when someone you love begins to pull away, don't rush to fill the silence. Don't try to chase what has become still. Instead, ask yourself, what part of me is afraid of being alone? What do I fear losing more, the person or the sense of self they awakened? What truth is this silence forcing me to face? In the echo of their absence, there is an invitation to grow, to confront your own shadow, to love yourself with the same intensity you gave to someone else, not as a way to forget them, but as a way to remember who you were before they arrived and who you can still become. And maybe, just maybe, the silence you fear is not the end, but the beginning of something far more profound. And so the silence deepens. Days pass, then weeks. You still think of them constantly, but their presence has dissolved into a quiet absence, like a dream you're trying to remember but can't. You wonder, was it ever real? Did they feel what you felt? Or were you just projecting, loving an illusion? These are the kinds of questions the mind starts to ask when the heart is left waiting. But here's the truth. You're not going to find the answer by chasing after someone who's not ready to face themselves. Because often, when someone ignores you, it has nothing to do with who you are, and everything to do with what your love awakened in them. Carl Jung spoke of projections, the unconscious parts of ourselves that we see in others. Love then becomes a projection screen for our deepest needs, fears, and unresolved pain. And sometimes when two people meet, their shadows collide before their hearts do. They don't just fall in love, they fall into the unfinished business of their souls. That is why it hurts so much, not because they left, but because of what their leaving triggered in you. Think about it. What if their silence is not an insult but a reflection, not of your inadequacy but of the unresolved within them? People often distance themselves not because they've stopped feeling, but because they've started to feel too much, too fast, too deep, and they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to hold it, how to let it hold them, so they disappear, not out of cruelty, but out of collapse. You were a mirror, and what they saw in that mirror terrified them. Because real love reflects everything, not just beauty but the broken, not just joy but the jagged edges beneath it. And most people are not ready to see themselves so clearly. That's the paradox. You give them love and it breaks them open. You offer closeness and they respond with distance. And you suffer thinking it's your fault, but maybe it isn't. Maybe it never was. Jung wrote, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This is what happens in love. Our inner wounds masquerade as patterns, repetition, emotional sabotage. And until we understand this, we will keep chasing people who vanish into the same silence, again and again and again. But here's the pivot. Their silence is not just a signal of their internal chaos. It's also a call for you to turn inward, to ask, why does this wound feel so familiar? Why does this absence echo like something I've known before? Because chances are you have. Maybe it's not just about this person. Maybe it's about every time you've been left, every time you've been unseen, every time you've had to prove that you're worthy of staying. And maybe it's time to stop proving, to stop performing, to stop begging for love that cannot meet you where you are. There's a kind of transformation that only happens in the aftermath of abandonment, when everything is quiet, when the noise of us has faded, when there's nothing left to hold onto but yourself. And that's when the real work begins, because the person who leaves becomes the teacher, and the silence they leave behind becomes the curriculum. You start to see the ways you abandon yourself just to keep someone else close. You start to feel the places inside you that still believe love must be earned, that love must be chased, that love only comes when you become something you're not. But real love doesn't demand that. Real love doesn't hide when it gets hard. It stays, it confronts, it grows. So if someone disappeared when things got intense, if they ignored you when you finally opened up, it doesn't mean your love was wrong. It might mean it was too right, too pure for someone still at war with themselves. And this is where the pain becomes power. When you stop waiting for their return and begin returning to yourself. It's not easy, it's lonely, but it's sacred. Because the greatest love you can ever know is the one that doesn't leave when others do. The love that rises from the ashes of abandonment and says, I will not reject myself just because someone else did. That's the real alchemy. That's what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation, the process of becoming whole. You don't become whole by being loved perfectly. You become whole by loving yourself through the imperfect love of others. By learning from those who couldn't stay, by forgiving those who never apologized, by holding space for the pain and letting it speak. What does your pain say right now? Does it ask for them? Or does it ask for you? There's a difference. Because sometimes the person you miss is just a symbol, a stand-in for the connection you've been craving all your life. But what if that connection begins with you? What if the return you've been waiting for is not theirs but your own? Back to your center, back to your truth. Back to the place where you no longer need someone else to prove your worth. And yet, if they do come back, if they return not with excuses but with awareness, then maybe, just maybe, something new can begin. But only if they've met their own shadow in the silence. Only if they've stopped running. Only if they now see you not as a mirror, but as a soul. Not as a fantasy, but as a person. Because love that disappears without looking back is not love ready to stay. And you, no matter what they left behind, deserve a love that stays, one that doesn't tremble in the face of vulnerability, one that doesn't need to test you to know your worth, one that doesn't silence you in order to feel safe. So if they return, ask yourself, do they come back with clarity or confusion? Do they offer presence or performance? Do they love you from fear or from freedom? Because the second time love appears, you must meet it not from longing, but from truth, not from desperation, but from discernment, not with open arms, but with open eyes. And if they don't return, then their silence was their answer, and your healing is your own. In the end, the deepest love is not about keeping someone close. It's about walking so far into yourself that you no longer collapse when others leave. It's about becoming so whole that even the pain becomes part of your power. Love is a mystery. It can build, it can destroy, it can open you, it can undo you, but its highest purpose is transformation. And transformation always begins in silence. So listen, not to them, but to the quiet voice inside you, the one that's been waiting patiently for you to come home.